This is good old boy Mike from Sips, Suds, and Smokes podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 168, The History of Game Shows. Hey, I'm Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Derek, how are you this week, my friend?
I'm doing really well, Chris. How are you doing this week?
I'm good. Hey, I'm recording my show with one of my best friends.
How's your place now? The renos are done. No more floods?
No more floods. I'm back in the house. Life is good. I'm recording the podcast. Everything's good. Were you able to get in any pop culture this past week?
Yeah, a little bit. Unfortunately, I have to disappoint the listeners. I didn't have any time to watch any new documentaries this week.
Oh,
but
so no documentaries.
I did convince my wife that I didn't have to convince her, but she started watching the McMillions documentary series that I had talked about 6 months back about the people that scammed the McDonald's Monopoly contest.
Oh, yeah,
and she
I remember you
binged.
mentioned that.
Yeah, she binged the entire 6 hours in one night yesterday. And she's like, this is great. And I was like, I knew you'd love it. So people who maybe haven't checked that out yet, that's still a strong contender from me. So
was she loving it?
I said that. I'm like, yeah, she's loving it. So anyway, that's her. But for me, I had a chance to watch a couple of movies this week. I actually watched 3 movies. The first one I watched was the movie Creed. It's the Rocky sequel that stars Michael B. Jordan as the son of Apollo Creed from the Rocky franchise. Have you seen the movie, Chris?
No. I mean, I've seen Rocky. Of course, I've seen Rocky 3. I liked Rocky 3. It was great. And I saw Rocky 4. And that's it. That's all I've seen. I haven't seen
You've never seen the original?
Oh, no, I've seen Rocky, the original. Yeah, it was good. I never saw Rocky 2, but I saw Rocky 3. Rocky 3, I think, was the best one.
I enjoyed them all. They're very entertaining. But like you,
I had the tiger, baby.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I watched Creed, which I had actually seen before when it first came out on video, and I remembered enjoying it. And then they did a sequel a few years later, Creed 2, and I never saw the sequel. And I noticed that on HBO, they'd been rerunning Creed 2. It's been back in the lineup. And so I thought, you know what? I really want to watch it. I put on my PVR, and I thought, I don't remember Creed 1 well enough. So I went back, and I actually watched Creed and then Creed 2 back-to-back on subsequent nights. And they were great. Like, I really enjoyed them more than I remember. Like, I enjoyed the first one more than I remembered enjoying it. And Creed 2, I thought, was a great sequel. And let me tell you, Michael B. Jordan, he is a fantastic performer. This guy is going to have a long and great career. And not to mention, like, he is so jacked in this movie. Oh, my God, does he look fantastic in this film. Creed and Creed 2, they were both really, really good. And then I had a chance to go back and also rewatch a movie I hadn't seen in a long time, Django Unchained, the Quentin Tarantino film starring Jamie Foxx. Have you seen it?
So you know me. I don't watch too many movies after 1989, but I have seen that one, and it's fantastic.
Okay, so I know I saw it in the theater, and I remember it being very long and very violent, as most Tarantino movies are. And I remembered enjoying it, but not loving it. And I don't remember ever seeing it a second time beyond my original theater experience of this film. And out of the blue, it was in the lineup, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it another try. And I loved it. And I'm like, I watched it, and I thought, this is way better than I remember it being. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed it, way more than I expected to. And it was a very, very pleasant surprise that I felt it was that good on a subsequent viewing. And I kind of feel like I'm almost cheated myself by not rewatching it before now. So I think I may have to go back and check out some of the other Tarantino films that are a little more recent that I haven't watched in a while. Like Hateful Eight, I only saw the one time. And again, I liked it, but I didn't love it. Inglourious Bastards, I did not like, but I am willing to give it a second go around. But considering how much I like Django, I think I got to go back and take another look at some of those ones.
I haven't seen The Hateful Eight, but Inglourious Bastards, I watched the opening 5 minutes alone. Is worth watching. It's so good. Oh man, that Christoph Waltz. Oh my goodness.
Well, and he's in Django Unchained as well.
Yes,
right?
he was.
He won an Oscar for it. It was and I remembered his performance being strong. And I mean, Jamie Foxx, that guy. His performance is great. He's an Oscar winner. He can act. He can sing. Like, he's the full deal. He's the full package. And so, I was all in with the cast of this from day one. And this is a tour de force. Everybody brings their A game in this. Leonardo DiCaprio is amazing. He's not in the movie nearly as much as I seem to remember him being in the movie. Samuel L. Jackson plays a much older character than the actor actually is, and he does a great job. Even Don Johnson has a small part in this that I totally forgot about. It was solid. If you haven't seen Django Unchained or you haven't seen it in a while, I strongly recommend you go back and take another look. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised by how well it holds up and how good it was.
So here's the thing for me. My wife and I think we're going to be looking for a new show to binge watch. So what we'd like to do is, and I don't know if anyone else does this, but we like to have one kind of serious show and then one like 30-minute comedy. And then sometimes we'll mix them up, like one night we'll watch, the drama. They're usually an hour long. And then we might throw a comedy in, or the next night watch a comedy just to mix it up. So for the serious show, we've been watching Sons of Anarchy. And I got to be honest with you, like, it's just okay for me. I think it's got to the point where we just finished season 3. And for me, every episode's just the exact same. It's like, hey, you guys go here and you guys go over there. And hey, man, you go back them up. Okay, let's vote. And then they all hug it out. And then they go and do crimes. And so it's just the same thing every week. Like, it's just, I don't know. The show kind of sucks. So, and then for our comedy show, we had started watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And remember I mentioned I didn't really like it? And then a bunch of people reached out to me. And they sent emails and stuff. And they were like, no, you got to give it another chance. Give it another chance. So I did.
Well, remember, I picked Captain Holt as one of my best supporting characters on TV.
He's very good. But
he is very good.
It's not just him. I went back and gave it another chance. And I'm glad I did, because I like it a lot better now.
Oh, good.
I think I was just really put off by Andy Samberg. Like, he just smirks and hams it up for the camera. And to me, it was just all a little bit off-putting. But the rest of the cast, they're so good. I think the rest of the cast makes him a bit more bearable. So I've been able to stick with that. And the other thing I want to mention, I took your advice and I started watching WandaVision.
Oh, okay. I got to hear this then.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, you got to keep in mind, I know next to nothing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, other than, you had me watch Iron Man and Guardians of the Galaxy for this podcast. Right.
Yep.
I really like WandaVision. And the thing is, it's good. And the thing is, I have no idea who these characters are. I have no idea what the hell's going on. There's literally zero frame of reference for me, but I feel like it's kind of a good thing.
I think that's why I suggested last week that you might like it. It really leans on the nostalgia factor, and the fact that they don't really explain what's going on. It's either going to turn you off right away, where you're like, I don't get it, I'm done, or I don't get it, but I kind of want to know where it's going, so I'm going to stick around. So how many episodes have you watched?
Just 2. So I watched the first one. It was like black and white. It's like they were in the
Dick Van Dyke Show.
And then the second one was almost like they were in Bewitched or something like that.
Yeah, that was more the feel of it, yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know where it's going or what's going on, but I get the feeling they're going to reveal a little bit more as they go, so it should be interesting. I'm really liking it. But if anyone has any suggestions for shows that my wife and I should start binge watching, just hit me up on Twitter @CMcBrien, or you can email me, chris@popgoesyourworld.com, and I'm open to suggestions. So as I mentioned, I feel like Sons of Anarchy kind of sucks now, but one thing that doesn't suck...
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Yes, my dad joke. Oh, here we go. Okay, since we're doing a game show kind of theme this week, I wanted to do a game show dad joke. Okay, Derek.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you call bugs on a game show?
I don't know.
Contest ants.
Boo. Chris, come on. Last week's
Contest
spoke was
ants, Carl.
Just,
Contest ants. Star Trek could always see into the future, couldn't they?
What do you have that we can slap Star Trek logos onto?
Shatner's hair.
The toys that made us.
The TJ Hooker hair.
TJ Hooker.
I can have auxiliary power back in a few minutes.
Yeah, no, I really like it.
Con!
Why don't I give you a quick scan to make sure you're okay?
Kirk got around a little bit.
Go.
Do you need a tranquilizer?
Oh my God.
All right. So this week we are going to talk about game shows, a little bit of the history of game shows and sort of the evolution of game shows over time and how much we like them. So I would say we could just kind of start with a little bit of the history of game shows and we'll really get into it. I will say there's been a few constants throughout my life when it comes to pop culture. And, I think that's pretty obvious considering, I just watch the same movies, and TV shows over. But one thing I've always liked is game shows. And this isn't going to be like a top 5 list, of our favorite game shows. If you want that, you can go back and listen to episode 12 of this podcast. Yancey and I did our top 5 game shows of all time. But instead, I'd rather take a little bit of a look at kind of the evolution of game shows. Like I say, I've always liked game shows. Game shows are something you've enjoyed as well, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, in our trivia segments, we often mirror some of the flavor of some of the classic game shows of the day, and we reference game shows all the time on this podcast. I love them. They're certainly one of my favorite genres of television.
And game shows when they first started out, it was when there was black and white TV with shows like You Bet Your Life and like What's My Line and stuff like that. But game shows for me, they kind of really evolved into something completely different, and we'll get to that in a second. But I want to mention when they first came out, I think the studios basically, they had to come up with programming for housewives back in the 60s, and the original game shows were kind of boring, kind of dumb, to be honest. And I think it wasn't until the 70s the game shows really took off. The Match Game, for example, big in the 70s, right? But it actually started back in black and white, back in 1962. And what they would do is they used to just ask regular questions like, name a musical instrument. Boring, dumb, right? Yeah. And then they started to kind of evolve it. And then they started to ask more risque questions like Johnny liked to pour gravy on his blank, and then all of a sudden it was like, or, Johnny liked to put butter on his blank. And it just opened up all these double entendres and it would get a lot of laughs, right? So it really kind of transformed, from the old into the new. And the thing was, in the 70s, game shows really started to have some sort of, I guess you could say, adult content in them. Like things like the Newlywed Game and like I say, Match Game and Tattletales all had this questionable content. Remember when you were telling me about Buzzer TV?
Yes.
And you're like, hey, you got to watch this. They're showing these old shows from the 70s. Well, I recorded a bunch of those shows and I watched them with my 11-year-old son because I used to watch them when I was that age. I'm like, oh, you're going to love this. Let's just say it didn't go over very well with my wife. and I understand, some of the content on Tattletales and Match Game was more than just a little bit lewd. And like I say, my wife got really mad at me. And the one was the worst. So we're watching the Newlywed Game. Remember the Newlywed Show?
Oh, yeah.
And Bob Eubanks says, "Where's the strangest place you've ever made whoopee?" As if I'm not in enough trouble for that. Yeah. The wife answers, "In the
That's one of the all-time best unscripted answers ever.
So it's on Buzzer TV. Let's just say that watching old game shows is off the table in my house for the foreseeable future.
So Chris, one of the things that I think we need to talk about a little bit is the subdivision of game shows within game shows. So game show is a very broad category, and over the years has become an even more broad category. But I think within the game show classification, there are sub classifications. So one of the big distinctions that I've always felt is there are game shows and there are quiz shows. where the game shows are things like you were talking about. There are things like the match game, where you have some celebrities come on and or the newlywed game, where it's more about getting unscripted answers and double entendres and having fun with it. It's more like a party atmosphere.
Yeah.
Whereas you have quiz shows where contestants are rewarded for things they know, whether it's The Price is Right, the price of the thing, whether it's Jeopardy, whether it's Wheel of Fortune, where you can fill in the blanks and answer the puzzles, as opposed to some of the more unscripted sort of party loosey-goosey style game shows. And I love them all, but I know for me personally, I've always preferred the quiz show types, because that's how I always liked to enjoy my game show, was that idea of participation at home. You play along with the contestants. And I think that's what's been very appealing about game shows right from the beginning, is you can watch and play from home. Now, you don't have any stakes in what's happening. You're not going to win a prize, but it's fun to feel that you are superior to the contestant. Hey, I knew the answer and the contestant didn't. I would have won the $1 million. And I think that's a big part of the appeal of game shows, and always has been, was this idea of participation, of a passive participation from your living room while watching it at home. And I think that's a big reason why game shows have lasted the test of time, and why they continue to be very, very popular is people enjoy that idea of feeling like they're a part of it, even when you're really not.
It's interesting that you mentioned those quiz ones, like the ones that take some skill on behalf of the contestants, and you said you like those ones best. I like the other ones best, and I like the quiz ones. I mean, I enjoy those as well, but I like the other ones better because the other ones were more like, they're a little bit more entertaining. It's more entertainment, I guess, than a game show so much. And the other thing that I like is, as you know, I love nostalgia, and I love kind of the campiness that kind of came with it. And to me, it's just a trip back in time. Like when I watch Match Game, like you can just see it's a slice of life from the 70s from a completely different time. Like they're making fun of the Fanny Flagg's chest, and like Richard's smoking and Brett's drunk, and it's just like, what's going on? Like there's no way this would fly today. And I think that's why I don't like the remakes, because they don't capture that essence of time. So.
Yeah, and the shag carpet on the set of the Match Game, I love it. Yeah. But no, I mean, I can see what you're saying, and there's definitely that appeal to me. So as you had mentioned, we get on reruns on cable TV, we can get reruns of game shows from the 70s and 80s pretty regularly now. They're made available on a few different channels. And so one of the game shows that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more that I love is The Family Feud. Oh, yes. And it has lived on in some iteration, for 40 years. The format of the show has been very consistent, but the
writing's changed though.
They've had to change they've changed the hosts over time for a lot of different reasons, and the coloring and the flavor of the set has changed. But at its heart, you have your family of 5 people. They're going to answer questions, however many answers on the board, and out of 100, and you're trying to get the most number of points. But I watched some of those Family Feud episodes from the 70s and 80s, and the answers people give are very telling of the kind of environment that they're in, the world they're in, the time they're in. It's very much a slice of Americana. It's the kinds of things that people say, and the way that you can watch an episode from 1981 and they ask a question and you see what the responses are. And tomorrow I can watch a new episode with Steve Harvey where they ask 100 people that exact same question this year, and the answers are completely different just because of people's environment, the way perception of events, whatever. So I can still enjoy the kind of thing you're talking about, where you get that nostalgia factor by watching the old game shows, simply by the kinds of questions they ask. Like a lot of the shows ask pop culture questions. Well, if the show was recorded in 1983, the pop culture questions are all about 1983. Yeah. If you don't know what happened in 1983, that's not going to help you now. True. And for me, that's half the fun is they ask questions and you're like, on the show Dynasty, name 3 of the actors. I'm like, I have no idea. And of course the people are they know it because it's big to them at the time in that moment. And that's part of what I like about watching some of these old game shows is to me, I'm curious, like, what kind of questions do they ask them in 1979. Oh, well, that's interesting. So.
I'm glad you mentioned Family Feud because I like the old Family Feuds. Richard Dawson was his version was great, and even when they brought on Ray Combs, it was so good. But it was all because of the writing. The writing was so good, and by the writing I mean the quality of the questions that were so good. When I watch the new iterations of the show, they suck, and it's because the questions are crappy. But one thing that just stood out to me when you were mentioning that, I remember with Family Feud, there was one that I'll never forget. There was this family on there, and they asked the question, "What's something that makes for a good party?" And the guy's like, "Burn!" He buzzed, "Women." Oh my God, it was like such a 70s answer. And then the next question they asked,
I'm sure it was on the board too.
It was not. It should have been. It was 70s. Geez. But then one of the other questions was they asked the same family, the same guy. They said, "What's something that you say to your coworkers first thing Monday morning?" And he's like, he buzzes it like, "Yeah." He's like, "Did you get drunk?" I'm like, oh my God. Like, I was just rolling on the floor. Anyway.
This was back in the time where people had no fear that what they said would live around forever, right? They're like, yeah, it's going to air once. No one else is ever going to see it or hear it. Whereas today,
here's this 40 years later, I mentioned this. This is some guy that lives in the States.
A couple of my favorite Family Feud answers. And let me tell you, if you want to have a good time, and I've done this more than once, have a couple of drinks, and then go on YouTube and look up the best Family Feud Fast Money answers. And you can find videos that are 10 and 12 minutes long. And it's the best clips from the entire run of the show ever. And apparently they did a Family Feud in the UK. So you have a British version of the show. Right. It works exactly the same way. And you get like all these bizarre and risque answers. It's hilarious. But anyway, a couple of my absolute favorites. During the Fast Money, Richard Dawson, he's asking the woman the questions, and he says, the month in which a woman starts to show during a pregnancy. And she says, September. Richard Dawson loses his mind. The audience is laughing. Richard Dawson literally falls on the floor laughing, and he's like waving at the producers like, okay, you got to stop the clock on this one. Like, everybody's laughing. And it takes the woman a minute to realize what they wanted was like, third month, fourth month. And she says September. Anyway, it takes him a minute to compose himself. He gets back up and he tries to read her the last two questions, and he can't even get through those even after a bit. And so they keep laughing and they stop. So they finally get it under control. They just throw the clock out the window. They're like, when you can finally, they give her a chance to answer the last two questions, which she finally does. Then they bring out the person who's been in the back with the headphones on, who has no idea what's happened. Soon as Richard Dawson gets to that question, he can't even finish the question. He just bursts out laughing. The audience is laughing. The families are laughing. This poor woman is like freaking out she's like, because she's thinking, I have 10 seconds to answer these questions. What's wrong with you? It is a spectacle. Oh my God. It is so funny to watch. So I would strongly encourage you to look up that one on YouTube.
Oh, for sure. There's tons of good stuff on YouTube with some of these old game shows. But Family Feud, I just want to stay on this for a second. So Family Feud came about because of the match game. And it's not just Richard Dawson, okay? Because Richard Dawson was on the match game, obviously, and then got the job doing Family Feud. But if you ever remember watching match game, they'd have the two contestants going, and whatever contestant matched the most after 2 rounds would go on and play what was called Super Match. And they'd go up, and they got to pick a couple different celebrities to give them suggestions. And then they would try to, match with the Super Match. But the way the Super Match worked was they polled the studio audience and got the top 3 answers and put them on the board. And you had to match. And you would get like $100, $250, or $500. And that part of the game, they evolved into Family Feud. That's where Family Feud came from, was from that game. And they were like, hey, this is another game. We could just keep polling the audience and then get somebody on, people to come on and try and guess the answer. So that's how the evolution of that. I have a question for you that we mentioned quiz game shows, kind of the campy fun game shows. What makes a good game show?
So I think there's a number of things that can go into this. And I mean, it's not just a single formula, or else they would have completely cracked it. I mean, there needs to be a certain amount of originality, but I think anything where the audience can feel invested in the show, whether it's they're trying to answer the questions, or whether it's they have a a desire to watch this person win something that's so outrageous that you just like the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is a good example of that. Like people, as much as you want to answer along with the question, the idea that a guy can win $1 million over the course of an hour is thrilling. You're right there with them going like, man, this would be awesome. It's a person I've never met wins $1 million. Like how thrilling is that to feel like you are a part of this moment? You're not getting any of that $1 million, but just the idea that you can empathize with the contestants and that you have a desire to watch them win. Or the other way, something like the Gong Show where you're just like, I can't wait for this guy to get gonged. Nothing's going to make me happier than watching this guy get kicked off this show. So to have that emotional connection either for or against the contestants, I think is a big one. In the case of quiz shows, being able to participate in a way that makes you feel like you're a part of the show. Like I think something like Jeopardy's a good one where they literally just, here's the answer, give us the question. And it's just, over the course of the show, you get these 60 questions and you can just play along. It's super simple formula. Or you get something like Password, where the audio, you at home can see it. They go, the password is sandwiches. And then you can watch along but meanwhile, the people in the studio have no idea. And so it's this little bit of the pull back the curtain of I can play at home because I know something they don't know.
Sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
It's such a good point. Remember the $100,000 pyramid, one of my favorite shows. I used to cover up the bottom of the screen with my hand. So I wouldn't see, and then try to guess along with them. So you're right.
Yeah, no, when my wife and I, because she likes game shows as well, not nearly as much as I do, but whenever we watch Pyramid and they get to the fast money part of the pyramid, we look at each other and we go, okay, who's playing and who's watching? Because sometimes I'll get the answer before the contestant, and so I need to know that I've got the right answer, so I stop guessing. So usually. Honestly, when it comes to that, usually I say I want to play, and the wife's like, "Fine, you like game shows, go ahead." And then I'll say like, "Things at a wedding," and she'll be like, "That's right." And then I have to listen to like 5 more clues before the person on TV either gets it or says pass. Yeah.
Some of the things that I think that make a good game show, the host, number one, I think is really important. The format, which you touch base on, and the other one that I think is important is the set. Like especially when
I don't know that I think I could argue either way. I think a good set certainly helps create like a visual impression, but I think you can have a great show that has a very boring set. But I think you can have a boring show with a great set that you might remember more fondly than it really was.
It doesn't have to be an elaborate set. It just has to be memorable. And the thing is when we went through a period of time where they started to remake a lot of the game shows. And for me, it's like 3 legs on a stool. You need the host, the format, and the set. And if you don't have one of those things working, it just doesn't work. And that's one of the things that I didn't like about a lot of the remakes. Remember the Game Show Network? You watch the Game Show Network, right?
Yeah, believe it or not, I no longer have the Game Show Network simply because they changed the one that's available in Canada, which I believe is slightly different than the one in the US. When they first made it available, it was nothing but those old game shows. And between that and the music video channel, I didn't watch anything else. Then they took away my music video channel, and the Game Show Network started doing, quote, original programming that sucked. So I'm like, well, I'm not paying for this channel. So now I don't have that one either.
It came out around 2000, somewhere around there, or maybe just a bit before or a bit after. And you're right. When the Game Show Network first came out, they started out by only showing old shows from the 70s and 80s. It was great. And then for some reason, like you mentioned, they got this bright idea that they should create their own content. And it sucked. And a lot of it was they were just rehashing old game shows with new versions. I remember they did Lingo and Chain Reaction, which were both Canadian game shows. And
the original Lingo I liked a lot with Chuck Woolery.
No, that's the remake.
That's a remake?
That's a remake. So it was originally a Canadian game show. Oh, what the hell was the guy's name that hosted? It was done out in BC. And they remade it on there. And then the other thing that the Game Show Network did, you touch base on, was that they kind of made their own. Like they came up with their own shows.
Well, because that's how they generate money, right? If they own it's a dollars and cents decision. If they own the content, then they're going to generate more money as opposed to paying a licensing fee to show old ones. So I mean, I don't fault them for wanting to do original programming, but you lost someone like me who had previously been paying a subscription fee and been subjected to your advertisements. by not giving me the whole thing that I want out of a game show network, which is classic game shows. I'm not saying I need them all day long, but when the only classic game show you show is a Family Feud and they're not even that quote classic, you're showing me like older ones from 5 years ago, I'm out. I'm all out.
I know. There was one new one that they came up with. I can't remember what it was called. It'll come to me. They had these contestants and they would answer trivia questions. And if they got it wrong, they dropped them down a hole. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like,
Wasn't that called Pitfall?
No, because that was the Canadian game, Pitfall, with Alex Trebek.
With Alex Trebek, yeah.
If they got it wrong, they went down really slowly down an elevator. They went down the floor. But in this one, if you got it wrong, you fell through a trap door, like never to be seen again. I want to say it was called Russian Roulette. I don't know if that was right, but
okay.
So you know how I have the CTV Throwback app? I've mentioned I love it, right?
Yes. Yep.
So I put it on the other day, and I'm flipping through it, and I look on the icon, and it says The Gong Show, which you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Because it looks different. It's not the one with Chuck Barris and J.P. Morgan and, you know, you know. So I'm like, what is this? And I'm like, who the hell is the host? He looks weird. So I put it on, and it's Mike Myers. And
what?
he's in this prosthetic makeup.
Yeah.
And he's playing like some British guy that he's some character he's come up with. And it's too bad because I put it on and the kids really liked watching it. But the thing is, it tries to be like those 70s shows, so it gets all like lewd. And of course, my wife steps in and goes, "Turn it off," you know. but it was pretty good. So you mentioned, you know, Family Feud. That's been redone how many times? And I remember To Tell the Truth was an old show, and they remade it around late 90s with John O'Hurley, and now they've remade it again with what's the actor's name? It escapes me. Something Alexander. It's okay. It's nothing great. And Match Game, I always think of it as the original, but in 1990 they came out with a new version with Ross Schaefer. He was Canadian. Do you ever remember there's a Canadian show called Love Me, Love Me Not, where they ran around the flowers?
Do not remember that.
He was the host of that. He hosted Match Game, and then Michael Berger, and then I think Ricky Lake, and then Alec Baldwin does it.
Alec Baldwin's hosting it now, yeah.
But it's not good. It doesn't have that same campiness to it. Even Let's Make a Deal was originally done with Monty Hall, the Canadian from Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And now they remade it with Wayne Brady. And I like Wayne Brady. I think he's great. But it just doesn't work. I don't know.
Yeah, I think some of these shows, it was like capturing lightning in a bottle, and it was the right place, the right time, the right host, the right format, whatever. And it in some cases, the idea doesn't translate as well to a more modern audience, and that's why you are seeing a lot of them get remade and fail, but get remade again because there's the potential that if they can get it right, they'll have a hit. But unfortunately, I think some of them, it's just they're not quite making the mark. Like the Let's Make a Deal is on every day before The Price is Right on morning TV, and I guess it's fairly cheap to produce. And there's not a lot of competition, so it probably does pretty well in the ratings. And again, a lot of the decisions are dollars and cents decisions, so it doesn't surprise me that show is still there. And it's like you said, Wayne Brady is a good host. He's a good host of that show, and that's certainly helping to prop it up. Again, it was never my favorite show on the best of times, but I'm not a big fan of the remake of that one.
One of my favorite parts of game shows from the 70s and 80s were the quote-unquote celebrities that they would get on. Like, that was the best. They were a bunch of these Z-list actors that were just doing the job because it paid scale. And if you think about the original Match Game, or the one in the 70s, Richard Dawson, was on there, obviously. And the only reason he was on there was because he played this, little character, Newkirk, in Hogan's Heroes. He was like a B-lister. Yeah. And even on Match Game, Brett Summers, who was so good. She was only on the show because the producers wanted Jack Klugman, because he'd been in 12 Angry Men and he was in The Odd Couple. Uh-huh. And he said, "I'll come on the show on one condition. You bring my wife on." And he was married to Brett Summers at the time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I knew Brett Summers was a staple, and Charles Nelson Riley.
But Brett Summers only came on because her husband insisted that he came. And the thing was, Jack Klugman just wasn't a fit for the show. He just didn't fit. But Brett Summers was perfect. And then, like you mentioned, Charles Nelson Riley.
Oh my God.
He was absolutely perfect for the show. Perfect. My God, he was funny. We make no bones about it, and we're Canadian. And there was actually a couple of really, really good Canadian game shows. You mentioned Pitfall. That's where Alex Trebek got his start.
We'll get to my favorite one in a bit, but you start with your list.
Oh, I've got a whole bunch. Remember Definition?
Yep.
And the thing with Definition that made it so funny was, well, it had a great theme song that later got sampled into like a rap song. But
yep.
And then
was used in the Austin Powers movies.
Yes, you're right. You're right, because, Mike Myers being Canadian and all.
Yeah.
The prizes on that show used to kill me, because you, as a kid growing up in Canada, you'd watch, the American game shows, and you'd watch people win a car, or $10,000, back in the 70s. And then you watch Definition and they win like pantyhose. Like the worst prizes ever.
Chris, there's an old joke, and I'm probably going to screw it up, and I apologize, but it's like there's two game show hosts walking down the street, and one, Canadian and American game show host, they bump into each other, and they're like, "How are you doing?" "I'm doing great, thanks." And the Canadian guy says to the American guy, "What's new with you?" And the American game show host says, "I'm driving here in my new car today." And he goes, "That's great. What's new with you, Canadian game show host?" And he goes, "I'm wearing my new toque."
Exactly.
And that's pretty much that's exactly it. It's like the US shows had the dollars, and boom, the prizes were great. The Canadian show, not so much.
There was a show out of Toronto called Just Like Mom. Do you remember that show?
I had a buddy who was on it, and we never let him live it down.
Oh, man, it was Fergie Oliver, who used to do some of the Jays games. And it was like him and his wife, and they had like families on, and like he was so creepy. It was like
it's
your skin crawl.
Very creepy to see, and they show the old ones on reruns, and they've rebooted that show more than once. It's currently it's been recycled right now. They call it Just Like Mom and Dad, and you can come on with either or both of your parents. Yeah, I've never watched it because, again, I'm like it was not really a show that appealed to me as a child or as an adult. Again, because I don't have kids, I couldn't really care less. But
there was a Canadian show called Talk About. I remember that one.
I liked that one.
I liked it too. And the same host, I want to say his name was, Wayne something or other. He was out. He's out in Vancouver now doing like the weather and the news out there. And he did another show called Acting Crazy. And it was like these people, and they would do charades.
Yes.
And then you mentioned Monty Hall. He did another show called Split Second. I don't think a lot of people remember. And there was a show called The Liars Club. Do you remember The Liars Club?
Yep.
And they would have like weird items, and they'd pass it around, and they would like say what it was, and then you had to guess which one was right. But the one I wanted to mention from Canadian Game Show was one called Reach for the Top. Do you know Reach for the Top? You ever hear of it?
It sounds familiar. Tell me a little bit about it.
So it was high school students, and high school students would go on, and it was trivia based. It would be this school versus this school, and they would ask really tough trivia questions. The reason I bring it up is because I was on the Reach for the Top team for my high school when I was in high school, because I always liked trivia and I was good at it. And I actually got kicked off my team for Reach for the Top. And
Did they catch you using steroids, Chris?
No. The thing was, I contest this to this day. So we're in trials for the TV show, and we're getting ready to, because we were, you had to qualify to get on TV, right? And so I'm doing it with my team. And they asked the question, what does the acronym SNAFU stand for? And so I buzzed and I said, situation normal, all up. And I got thrown off my team for saying that. That's correct. They said, no, it's situation normal, all fouled up. And as a result, I used the F word, and I got kicked off my Reach for the Top team. But I contested it because I was like, that's what it stands for. That's the real thing. And I got in an argument with them, and I got kicked off my team. So I got kicked off Reach for the Top. So
okay.
Can you back me up? SNAFU, that's what it stands for, right?
Oh, that is absolutely what it stands for. But I would think that by high school, you should have realized that using the F word on TV was probably not going to be acceptable. And you should have subbed it in with another word that began with F, which I know you would have known at least one of those. So
they should have just beeped it out like our producers just did. So, jeez, I tell you.
So the other one of the Canadian TV, a couple of the other Canadian game shows, there was another one that was filmed here in Toronto called Jackpot. And I remember one of my friend's moms went on there and she won like $5,000 or something.
That was the one with the riddles, right?
Yes.
Here's my riddle.
15 contestants, and they all had numbers, and you go, I pick number 6. Okay, this is my riddle. And then if you got the jackpot riddle, you would switch places with that person, and you would win the jackpot money. And I remember one of my buddies, his mom went on there, and it was like you had the same group of contestants on for a whole week, because it could take a week before you were asked your riddle and all the rest of that. And I remember she didn't get asked until the very last day, and then she ended up winning a bunch of money. So it was pretty exciting. One of my favorites. It's super cheesy. I want to think it was from Quebec because the cheesiest game shows always were. They were out of Quebec, but they were in English. But it was very clear that there was a lot of cultural misunderstandings. So some of the game shows were a little bizarre. It was basically. So it was called the Mad Dash. And at the beginning of the show, they would go, "Welcome to the Mad," and everyone in the audience would go, "Dash." And it was basically a game board that was built for real people. So you played in pairs, and usually it was a married couple. And the one person would be there and answer the trivia questions and roll a giant die if they got the question right. And the other partner was on the game board as the game playing piece, and they would take that many steps forward or backward on the game board. And then when you'd land there, you would either get a prize or there would be like a little skill testing challenge of some sort. Like it's, here you've got to throw 3 basketballs through a hoop or something, or you've got to, like a whack-a-mole, you got to hit them in a certain amount of time, some little stupid challenging thing. And then if you manage to get your partner all the way through the game board, you won all the prizes they collected along the way. It was super cheesy. And it just, I always thought it was fun. I always thought the idea of getting to be an actual piece on the game board as a person, just as a little kid, thrilled me to no end. But I've seen some of the clips in replay, like on YouTube and on some of the classic game shows, and it's like, oh boy, this game show kind of sucked. And the prizes were awful. You would get thrilled. It's like, you've won a $200 vacuum cleaner from Sears, and you've won a rolling pin, and it's like, you've won a grand total cash and prizes of $325. And the people would lose their minds. I'm like, you won $300? Like, I just watched The Price is Right. The guy won a car and a trip to Hawaii. Like, you got hosed, man.
I know.
So we mentioned some of the things that make for a good game show are, the hosts and the set and the format. Which hosts do you think were some of the best ones? Not to do a top 5 list or something. Maybe we'll do that at some point. But who were some of the best game show hosts for you? I know what mine were.
Well, I mean, the ones that were quick on their feet were always good. So, I mean, we've already talked about Richard Dawson. And I think we previously have talked about Alex Trebek on numerous occasions. Just the gravitas that he brought to Jeopardy all those years is unparalleled. But then you have the ones like Bob Eubanks from the Newlywed Show. Was always good with a little quip here and there.
Yeah, and if nothing else, he had such a great voice. I think a lot of them had really good voices, right?
Yeah, and I think that's certainly part. But some of them maybe weren't great hosts per se, but had great names. I always liked the host Wink Martindale.
Oh yeah, Wink Martindale
was Tic Tac Dough for many years. It was like just some of the game show host names were kind of ridiculous. Those are probably the ones that come to mind. The guy from the Match Game, I can't think of his what's
Ray
his name?
Combs?
No, Gene Rayburn, is that his name?
Oh no, Match Game. Sorry, Gene Rayburn.
Sorry.
Yeah, he was one of the best.
I don't know.
I thought he was good.
I'm sort of hot and cold on him. I think it depends on the day of the week, but most times I'm not a big fan of his, which I think is a big part of why I never really clicked with that show, is I was just never really a fan of him. I like the panel, and I like the idea of the panel giving weird and bizarre answers, but I just never felt. I personally never thought that he was a great host.
That long, thin microphone that he used to use, remember that? He invented that.
Yeah, Bob Barker.
Bob Barker.
He's got to be one of the greatest of all time, despite the fact that there was certainly some later in life shenanigans about his treatment of some of the female co-stars. I mean, hey, people do some shady things sometimes, but what we saw on screen was always very professional. And he was great at that job, despite any other possible issues that he may have had behind the scenes.
And one I want to mention is Bert Convy. I think Bert Convy was one of the best, because he did so many of them. He was so prolific, and he was just so likable, and he just kept things flowing. And so I thought Bert Convy was really good. I'm glad you mentioned Bob Barker, because I will mention that I do think you could also look at the worst game show hosts, and I like him. As a comedian, I liked his TV show. I liked him on Whose Line. But Drew Carey, I think, is awful as a host. And you just got to compare him to Bob Barker. to know, like, Drew Carey, I don't know. He just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, he does an adequate job, but I have not yet warmed up to Drew Carey as the host of Price is Right. And my wife watches it. Like, we usually have it on in the morning if we're in the room where the TV is between 11 and 12 o'clock, because there's nothing else on at that time. So we usually just throw it on, because despite his pluses and minuses as a host, I've always liked The Price is Right. I like the games. And for years, when I was in high school and my first couple of years of university, I used to work at Canadian Tire, and I often would work in the housewares department. So it was like all the cleaning products, all the pots and pans, like everything that you would find in a home. And it was a lot of sort of grocery type items that you can get that have long shelf lives. So I always was very good at The Price is Right, because I had a pretty good sense of what the items cost. And now that I'm a little older and I do my own grocery shopping, that helps too. So, it's just, there's something about that show where you can play along and feel a little superior when they're like, how much do you think this can of soup costs? Is it more or less than $3? And the guy's like, I think soup's $12, so that's over. And you're like, really? You really think soup is $12? You clearly do not shop for groceries in your household.
I'll come back to that in 1 second with Price is Right. I just want to also mention, not to dwell on the worst, but the worst game show host for me of all time was Louis Anderson. So Louis Anderson took over the Family Feud from 99 to 2002.
Yeah.
He was awful. Like,
he was not good.
The worst game show host I've ever seen. But you mentioned The Price is Right. You've liked The Price is Right for many years. If you're like me, you watched it when you were a kid, and you obviously still like it today. What's your favorite? Do you have some favorite games on The Price is Right?
I definitely like more of the older games. One of the things, so I want to shift before I really answer your question here, because I want to lose sight of this. There's definitely been an evolution in game shows around how they award prizes and the kinds of prizes they award, and this idea of playing along at home and as a viewer feeling rewarded and excited for the contestant. And I feel that The Price is Right is a good example of this, where today's games on The Price is Right usually just come down to a coin toss. Here's two fantastic prizes, a big screen TV and a trip to Hawaii. All you need to tell us is which one costs more, which I guess does take a little bit of skill, but at the end of the day, it's just you're doing a random pick and you win a big prize. And it's like, if you get it right, you get both prizes. To me, it doesn't really challenge. Like, sure, hey, it's challenging in the sense that they want to win the prize, but where's the skill? Where's the challenge? I find a lot of the older Price is Right games actually required you to have a fundamental knowledge of the price of goods. Here are 6 things. You need to know which 4 of these are all going to come in under $3. Okay, yeah, sure, you could guess. But if you do some grocery shopping on a regular basis, you're going to know that a pack of gum is $1.09, and that comes in under your $2. And that, the bag of cookies is $6 and is not. So I don't have a particular, to answer your question, I don't have a particular, this was my favorite. But there's a lot that I like, and it's mostly the old ones. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of them anymore because people tended not to win on them very much because they were difficult.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a favorite, but I have some that I really liked. So Hole in One, I always liked. And I liked all the old ones where Bob Barker would do the putt himself. Yeah. And then, remember Cliffhanger? That was another good one.
With the yodeler?
Yeah. And then he would fall off.
That
was
they
good.
Still play that one, yeah.
But they made the range.
They made the range bigger, though, for like the range game and the yodeler. I think with the yodeler, you had to be within a certain number of dollars, and the guy would take a step for each dollar that you were away from your guess. I think they now give you more steps before he falls off the ledge. Maybe, again, they're trying to make it easier.
Well, maybe it's, like you said, they're trying to make things easier, or also because, money is, a different value now than it was. There was one where they had the big red dice, remember? And they'd roll them inside that thing. I think it was called Let 'em Roll. And then they try and figure out they stick the dice into like this square on the thing. And, and there was one where you'd punch the holes.
Yeah, the punch out. They still do that one.
Yep. And then there was the shell game. And I think one of my favorite ones, I don't know if it was called 10 Chances or something. And you get like 3 digits and you'd have to pick 2 in the right order. So it'd be like a 3, a 5, and a 1. You'd be like, it was $15. And you write and with a marker, and then you'd push a button and it would drop down.
Yeah,
Remember?
They definitely don't play that one anymore.
I always thought everything on The Price is Right was way overpriced. Every time
to a certain extent, yeah.
I'd be like, like a couch is $8,000 in 1979. Really? Like, I don't know, some of it.
Well, there was and I mentioned this on the show way back. There was a documentary about a year ago, I think it was on Netflix, about a guy who went on The Price is Right. And he basically was like, it was his passion. He watched every day, he recorded episodes, he played back, and he made a giant list of all the prizes and realized they were giving away the same prizes over and over and over again, and the prices on those prizes never changed. So he's like, if I can get on, I know the exact prices of these things, I'm going to win a bundle. And then it was this whole scandal where he was helping somebody else because you couldn't be on the show more than once or twice or something. And so he was able to be in the audience but not be on the show, and he was feeding the answers to the guy on the thing, and the guy ended up getting the final Showcase Showdown like within like $2 or something, and they accused this guy of cheating. And yeah, it was again, you know me and my documentaries. For the life of me, I can't remember what it's called, but if you type Family Feud documentary, you'll be able to find it. I'm fairly certain it was from Netflix. It was really good.
That wasn't the only game show scandal either. Remember the movie Quiz Show? Came out back in '94.
Love it.
That was like back. I never saw it, but it was about the game shows in the 50s, right? Where the producers were like giving answers to the contestants and scamming the thing out of money. And there was a guy named Michael Larson in the 80s, and he figured out the pattern to the light board in Press Your Luck.
Yeah.
He memorized it, and then he went on the show and he won big. So I mean, there's been game scandals over the years.
Sorry, before you go on, I want to just touch back on this idea of the scandal in the quiz show and sort of the repercussions of this. So Quiz Show, I believe, was directed by Robert Redford. Stars Ray Fiennes. It's great. I love it. It's one of those. I don't want to say one of my all-time favorites, but if I see it in the lineup, I watch it. And I don't own a copy of it, and it's one of those ones that I haven't seen in a long time. And honestly, I was going to get you to watch this in the not too distant future for this podcast, but I've been having a hard time finding a copy of it, to be honest with you. But in any case, one of the things that they talk about towards the end of the Quiz Show movie is they say, they expose that there was this cheating, and they say like, well, why were they doing it? And they're like, well, we wanted the contestants to win because it's good entertainment. They were making more money off their ad revenues to have a good television show that they didn't mind giving away the prizes. They were making more money in the average. Again, it all comes down to dollars and cents. And so there was like this epilogue where they're like, well, why were they doing it? Why give them? They're like, we wanted them to win. And they're like, well, now that you've been caught, what are you going to do? And they're like, we're just going to make it easier. We realized we didn't have to ask incredibly hard questions and feed them the answers to make them look smarter than everyone else. We just had to make the questions easier. Now we don't have to give them the answers. We know they're going to know the answers because we're making it easier to win. And this is a problem I have with modern game shows for a lot of them, is they have dumbed down the shows so much because it's good TV to see people win these prizes. And hey, I'm guilty of enjoying the show more when people are winning big prizes. Like when I watch The Price is Right, like new episodes, and they're like, it's new car week. Every game we're going to give away a car. It's like, I love it when all 6 people win a car. It's entertaining. But it comes down to all these stupid games where it's just like, do you want 1 or 2? 2. Oh, that's the right number. You win a car. It's like, there's not a lot of skill in that. You're not asking them anything difficult. You're not asking them to perform a task or answer a question. And this is, I think, why I like some of these older game shows more, is there's a genuine, they ask genuine questions. The people on the show have to actually know stuff. And I think the contestants on the shows today, because people have a smartphone in their pocket, they're less invested in learning and memorizing and knowing trivia. They feel, if I need to know this, I'm going to look it up. And that's fair, but it makes for boring television if the questions are so dumb and so easy and so simple that literally anyone can answer the question. And I think that's a big failing of today's shows, is the producers are more interested in making sure the contestants are more often than not going to win the big prize because it's good television than they are about making an entertaining show. So
and game shows kind of evolved, in some cases that weren't even really game shows. They called them game shows, but they weren't. And this goes back. Remember back in the 70s, they had Battle of the Network Stars. It wasn't really a game show. It was almost like a reality show. And remember Love Connection and Studs?
I was never a fan of the Love Connection, but I know a lot of people that really enjoyed it.
American Gladiators, or even Survivor. Like, it's not really a game show, but they kind of like market it as such. But they're around.
Okay, hang on. Let me ask you this then. So this I think is this discussion that sort of loops back something I said earlier. You have the game show umbrella, and then under that, over time, subgenres of game shows have come to life over the years. What about something like a cooking show, like Chopped on the Food Network is a show that my wife and I really enjoy. We watch it all the time. And when I was talking to my wife about what our topic was earlier, she had mentioned that. She says, like, if you're doing a top 5 list, consider putting Chopped on the list because I know how much you enjoy it. And we had this side discussion about, like, is that a game show? And I think it definitely falls under the game show umbrella, but it is certainly more of that reality competition show. But it has what I like in that the contestants have to have some skill to win that show and to win that prize and to win the money. And so that's the question I've got to you, Chris, is assuming you're familiar with the show Chopped, do you think something like that would be considered a game show?
I know the show Chopped because the Canadian version, a buddy of mine was on that show. I don't really think that it is a game show per se. I think it's more of a competition.
Like a reality competition show?
That's what I think it is.
But I would put that under the larger umbrella of game show. Sure. I may not call it a game show, but it really, it borrows from all the things that the game shows that came before it have established, and they've sort of leaned on that model just enough. Again, Food Network, they got to make it about food. And the Food Network has a bunch of these, like Guys Grocery Games and things like that. Where again, I don't know if you'd call them game shows per se, but they definitely borrow from the idea of the game show. You know,
game shows were king for a long time, and they dominated TV, and then they just kind of died. And it was around 98, 99. They had this huge resurgence all because of one show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which you mentioned already. And the thing was, it was so popular. It led to a whole bunch of other shows that kind of mimicked it. Like there was The Weakest Link. Remember Greed and Deal or No Deal? The thing is, like for me at least, none of them really captured sort of the glee, of the 70s shows.
Yeah.
You know, like those old game shows were all about having fun. And they didn't take themselves too seriously. But all these new shows that were coming out around that time, around the early 2000s, they were serious and they were kind of epic, I mean, the set of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire probably cost millions of dollars to build. The old Match Game set was a bunch of plywood panels, shag rug, and cheap microphones. So, I don't know.
Hey, one thing we haven't really touched on, I know we're sort of getting to the end here, but what about game show theme music?
Oh, some of their themes are the best ever.
I was going to say you had your three-legged stool of this is what makes a good game show.
Yeah, I think you're right.
How important do you think the theme music is?
Let's make a four-legged stool. I think it's got to be a four-legged. That's a great point. There were some great themes, and some of the most memorable game shows I think had the best themes. Whether it was just something even like obviously Match Game and Family Feud. Family Feud had that Southern kind of feel to it, and Match Game was great and had the whole kind of wah pedal guitar of the 70s.
The $100,000 Pyramid always had its classic music.
It was just
Price is Right. I mean, some of these shows that have had the longevity is due to all the things we've mentioned, and I think in some cases that theme music has become so iconic that if you can just hear a few notes of a theme from a game show and know it instantly, like in my mind, that's made it a hit. And that's, again, one of the things I love when I watch some of these classic game shows that maybe I haven't seen in a long time. And I'm thinking to myself, am I going to like this? Is this going to hold up? Do I remember it? When I hear the music, like the intro music for the game show, if it, gives me a warm fuzzy inside, then I know I'm like, okay, the music is obviously a big part of why I remembered enjoying this show, and I sit down and I give it a try. And some shows have it, some shows don't, and I think it's a very important part of what makes a great game show.
Oh, for sure. Even the primetime shows like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, like that theme music, it's iconic. You said. I think there's some game shows I want to touch base on that I think people have maybe forgotten about. And I want to take a little trip down memory lane because,
so do I when you're done. I have something a little different, but
okay, cool.
Let's do you first.
Classic Concentration. It was hosted by Alex Trebek.
Yep.
And they would reveal these squares. And then there was like a rebus puzzle
Oh,
And
yeah.
And you'd have to solve it. It'd be like the number 2 plus clothes plus the number 4 plus a comb plus a 4. Oh, it's too close for comfort. And you'd have to figure it out.
Right.
Password plus super password.
I mentioned that earlier.
So good.
The password is bananas.
Do you remember there was a show, Scrabble?
Yeah, I as a
Chuck
terrible
Woolery?
speller, I like that show. My mom loves it. It's her all-time favorite board game. She loved Chuck Woolery, was her favorite game show host of all time. And like
Didn't
it
last
checked
long.
all the boxes. She loved it. I remember as a little kid, I think it was on at noon. And so we used to get off
I think
school.
it only lasted about a year and a half or so.
Yeah,
but
it was on over
yeah.
the lunch hour because we would come running home from school at lunch to have lunch. And my mom was always like had that on, and we would be able, that was like a little treat, is we were able to eat lunch in front of the TV, which at that time we were never able to do if Scrabble was on. And yeah, and again, it's, you might know the answer, but if you can't spell the word, you lose. And it's just reinforces that idea of the things that I like in a game show, that you need some skill in order to be able to win.
Blockbusters. Remember that one?
Yes.
With Bill Cullen. That was good. You mentioned another one that I thought came to mind was Tic-Tac-Doe.
Yeah.
Another one I think a lot of people forget about. You remember Win Ben Stein's Money?
I actually really liked that. I used to record them because at the end he would do the top 10 test of knowledge. It was just as fast as you can, 10 questions.
Yep.
And the problem with that show was he was so much smarter than most of the contestants. Nobody ever beat him. And my buddies and I used to record it, and we would watch them back. And it was,
That's where Jimmy Kimmel got his start, right?
Yeah, he was doing that and the Man Show at the same time.
And another one is Win, Lose, or Draw. So we mentioned before Burt Reynolds. We like Burt Reynolds around here. You know, he was the biggest movie star in the world, you know, from like 78 to 81, 82. And then, you know, his shtick, you know, was he made movies for the NASCAR demographic, and it got old pretty quick. So he found himself in some sort of, you know, financial trouble with the IRS, and he needed cash. And he had a game that he used to play at home with his friends, people like Dom DeLuise and Vicki Lawrence, and he turned it into a game show, and that was Win, Lose, or Draw. And I remember the men wore the black jackets, remember, with the shiny baby blue sleeves?
Yep.
And the girls had the black jackets with the shiny pink sleeves, and they played that. So again, another show I think people kind of forget about, but you can find all this stuff on YouTube. I know, because I've gone down those rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, so have I. Yeah, there's
so good.
There's a very deep game show rabbit hole you can go down on YouTube that just never seems to end. And if you've had a few beverages before you start it, some
Even
of those
better.
funny things are way funnier. So, Chris, one last thing I want to just hit on. So, one of the shows that I have recording on my PVR every week is this show called The Very, Very Best of the 1970s.
Oh,
and
nice.
every week they do a top 10 list. And it's just it's a nostalgia walk down memory lane, something from the 70s. And one of the episodes that was on recently was the best 70s game shows.
Oh God, that would be
So
good.
I'm just going to read you the list. It's a top 10.
Give it to me.
I'm going to start at 10 and go down to number 1. If we had more time, I would try and have you guess them, and I'm sure you'd guess them all.
Probably.
But we've hit on most of these. So this is just like a user. People get to vote online.
Okay.
So starting at 10, Let's Make a Deal.
Okay.
The Dating Game.
Mm-hmm.
The Gong Show.
Nice.
Name That Tune.
Oh yes, that was more 60s. Yep.
Match Game.
Match Game, of course.
The $10,000 Pyramid.
Match Game should be higher, but okay. Yep.
The Newlywed Game.
Yep.
Number 3, Family Feud.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, Hollywood Squares, which we have not.
I was never a huge fan of Hollywood.
I was never a huge fan of that either. And the number 1 show, according to the viewers, was The Price is Right.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
I think most of the good 70s shows are represented on the list. They may not be in the order that we would select them, but it's a pretty solid list.
So that being said, what would you say is your personal favorite? Do you have a personal favorite or personal favorites?
So I do. So one of the shows that it's sort of like my guilty pleasure show is the original Press Your Luck. Big bucks, no whammies.
Peter
Stop.
Tamarkin. Yep.
Yes, R.A.P. No longer with us. And one of so as a kid, I liked it because I liked the animation of the whammies, which, you know, it was fun. It was, you watched it. I liked game shows, and they had the little cartoon whammies.
That was Sergio Aragonis from Mad Magazine that did that.
I believe it was,
Yep.
yes.
He also did Gru, the comic
Yes,
book. Yep.
Gru the Wanderer, yes. And the whammies were always like, blowing up or crashing, and many of them were referencing pop culture. So there was like a Michael Jackson whammy and a Boy
he
George
would
whammy.
moonwalk in and take your money.
And they would like, and so I always, as a little kid, I always thought that was kind of clever and funny. But when I've been watching them as an adult now, I actually enjoy the trivia segment at the beginning. They ask them 4 pop culture questions. Yep. And if you buzz in before you get any, like if you know it, you buzz in, you say the answer is this. And if you're right, you get 3 spins. And if you don't know it, they give you 3 multiple choice answers. And if you get it right, you get 1 spin.
Right.
And again, it's a slice of Americana from the early 80s because the questions are usually very topical and timely.
Yeah.
So now I watch the show and I think, oh, I know all sorts of pop culture stuff, but it's like some of them are very specific to that era. So I have a lot of fun going back and watching those. And then of course they go through the board and they hit the whammies and your big bucks. And you know, again, it's you play at home. The guy's, you know, I press my luck. It's like, you have $10,000. What do you want to do? And I'm like, pass those spins. Don't lose your money, you greedy bastard. And he's like, I'm going to press it. And I'm like, you deserve to lose. Hit the whammy. Hit the whammy. And then the guy hits the whammy and you're like, oh, I told you were going to hit a whammy. So just I love that show. That's my all-time favorite. And I have seen the episodes where the guy cheated and won the $100,000. They didn't air it on TV. They did like a special years and years ago. They're like the top 25 best game shows of all time. And they literally just showed an episode of each of 25 game shows over the course of the 2 months they aired this show. And they showed that episode where the guy wins the $100,000 as the representative show of Press Your Luck. So I've seen it 1 time.
For me, if I had to pick my favorite in regard to gameplay, it would be the $100,000 pyramid. It's so good.
It's a good pick. Solid pick.
But I think in terms of entertainment value, I might even have a tie between Match Game and Tattletales.
Ugh, I don't like either of those.
Oh, because like the favorite thing for me of the game shows from that era was the camp and the cheesiness of the whole thing, that the B-list celebrities, the cheesy sets, the raunchy humor. They were like drinking and smoking on set. It's like a slice of time from back then. And when I go back and watch it, I find it to be just so funny. So I would say those 2 are probably my favorites. But anyway, on that note, let's have some
fun with Caveman.
Okay, so Derek, we've talked about this game a couple times tonight. And I mentioned it as one of my favorites, and that is the $100,000 pyramid. So I felt it was only appropriate that I made you sit in the hot seat tonight and do a round of the winner's circle of the $100,000 pyramid. All right, Derek, are you strapped in and ready to go?
Oh, yeah. I'm so pumped for this. Now, we don't talk about what the trivia is going to be before.
That's
we just say, are you doing it? Am I doing it? Yep. So when we had discussed doing game shows as a topic, in my mind, I thought, I hope Chris puts me in the $100,000 pyramid at the end for the trivia. I hope. So, yeah, you've totally made my night. So, right, I am ready to rock and roll.
You got your wish. So are you ready? We're going to try to go to the top of the pyramid. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you lists, and you have to guess the category. Okay? There's 6 categories in total. Okay. And if you can make it to the top of the pyramid in 60 seconds, you win $100,000. Okay? So, again, in past times when we've done this, I've given you sort of an overarching kind of theme for it. Not this time. It's just you got to try. It's like a regular game show. You got to guess the categories. Okay? Are you ready?
Ready.
Go. Bacon, eggs, cereal.
Things you have for breakfast.
Yes. The waitress, the waiter, the manager.
People in a restaurant.
Yes. I'm round and I'm flat and I'm in your drawer and you take me out and put your dinner on me.
What is a plate? A dinner plate. Things a dinner plate would say.
Yes. The bathers, the towels, the sand, the water.
Things at the beach.
Yes. Your misplaced keys.
Things you look for. Things you lose.
Yes.
Things you can't find.
Yes. A syringe, an old record player.
Things with a needle.
Yes. Didn't like record time. Ooh, I think we might have beat Billy Crystal on that round.
I don't know. We're close. We were close. Chris, you can make that check out to Derek Myers. That's Myers. Don't put the extra E in there.
Make sure you invest it wisely.
I'm good either way, man. Whatever works for you.
Nicely done. So no clues or anything. The categories could be anything. You did great.
Nice.
You should go on that show. For real.
Yeah.
Well, we just did. So
that'd be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, we had lots of fun talking about game shows. So next week we're going to come back with a movie review, and it's over to you, my friend Derek. What movie would you like to review here on the podcast next week? I have to go back and watch this movie, and then we're going to talk all about it next week. So what do you got?
Right. So I wanted to move away from the dark, post-apocalyptic, futuristic, horror, sci-fi genres that we've been visiting of late.
On behalf of myself, my wife, and everyone else, thank you.
Oh, well, don't thank me till you hear the title I'm giving you. So I wanted to move into a comedy. I narrowed it down to a few, but I think the one I've landed on is the 2012 film from Family Guy creator Seth MacFarlane. The movie is called Ted. It stars Mark Wahlberg as a guy who makes a wish as a little kid, and his teddy bear comes to life. And then the story moves ahead, and now he's an adult with a talking teddy bear as his best friend. It's called Ted. It came out in 2012. Written and directed by Seth MacFarlane. Seth MacFarlane does the voice of the teddy bear Ted. It's one of it's one of my favorite more recent comedies. I find that there aren't a lot of good comedies being produced these days. In my mind, this is one that really works for me. I mean, I really like Family Guy. I really like American Dad. I find that Seth MacFarlane's humor really appeals to me. And I think Ted is sort of his, some of the best of his best. He's done a few other films. 1,000 Ways to Die in the West, or 10,000 Ways to Die in the West, is not bad, but is a little more niche and not, I didn't think, not as funny. But Ted, I think, really holds up. And in fact, I actually enjoyed Ted 2, the sequel, more than I like this first one. But I think this first one's pretty strong. So you should have no problem finding it. I'm sure it's available on Netflix or Amazon or one of those ones. Take a watch. Let me know what you think of it. We'll come back next week, and you can tell me what you think about the movie about the talking teddy bear called Ted.
Nice. You don't nominate a lot of comedies, so this should be good. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah,
I mean, I try. I know you've got the 70s and 80s covered, and I try to look for movies that are a little more recent. And honestly, I haven't really found a lot of comedies in the more recent vein that I've enjoyed enough that I'd want you to watch and
That's
review.
That's because they don't make good comedies anymore.
Well, or they tend to retread on some of the stuff that's come before. You get a lot of the same formulas, or you get an updated version of, like, they did an upgrade of the Vacation film, and it's like, eh. So anyway, we'll talk all about this next week. And I hope you enjoy it. And in fact, I hope you enjoy it enough that it motivates you to then go and watch a sequel. Because like I said, I actually like Ted 2 more than I like Ted 1. But we can talk about that, the reasons why, next week when we come back and talk about Ted.
Come back and listen to our TED Talk.
Exactly.
All right. Next week, we're come back and we're going to talk about Ted. Until then, this is Chris McBride for Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.